Hi, you're listening to It Happened to Me, a rare disease and medical challenges podcast. The mission of our podcast is to support you, our listeners, and to create community as you confront the toughest challenges in life. All of us will experience health hardships. The real question is how we adapt. That's the focus of It Happened to Me, which wants to help you overcome limitations and live a full and satisfying life. Drawing on their own health challenges, co-hosts Cathy Gildenhorn and Beth Glassman interview guests who share stories and research to help you succeed in the face of difficult health obstacles. It happened to me. I'm not alone, and neither are you.
Today, we're joined on It Happened to Me by Tanita Allen. Tanita is a resilient and compassionate advocate of Huntington's disease. Tanita wrote a touching memoir documenting her story called We Exist. Tanita Allen earned her Bachelor of Arts in Public Affairs. She has earned her stripes as a certified paralegal, which helps her bring a wealth of experience in customer service and sales to her advocacy efforts.
Tanita is a member of the HD Community Advisory Board. Recently, in May 2024, Tanita was featured in Forbes discussing the importance of self-advocacy and how it can help you become an invaluable collaborator. Well, thank you, Tanita, for joining us today on the podcast and talking about a very challenging diagnosis and raising awareness about it. You have quite a story, but let's start at the beginning. Tanita, Huntington's is known as HD and is described as the trifecta: Parkinson's, ALS, and Alzheimer's all at the same time. Tanita, how would you describe Huntington's?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for having me on the show. And while Huntington's disease is a very complex neurodegenerative disease, it's a disease that's genetic and it's passed from parent to child. It's autosomal dominant, which means only one copy of the gene has to be present for that child to inherit it, for them to inherit the gene. And I had no family history of Huntington's disease. So I am the first person in my family to be diagnosed. So, yeah.
So, Tanita, how prevalent is Huntington's in the population?
Huntington's is very rare. It's extraordinarily rare. I mean, we have I don't know, I think they said something like 100,000 families are affected by Huntington's in this country. And we have a lot of people. So, I mean, a lot of people obviously in the United States, but it's just not as it's not as prevalent as like Parkinson's or, other diseases like that.
So this is a rare disease. And what were the symptoms that you experienced? And were those typical of other people who have Huntington's?
You could put 10 Huntington's patients in a room and all 10 of us are going to be completely different. That's the interesting part about Huntington's. Yeah. What's interesting for me is I started having symptoms that were not characteristically common first. I had the choreatic movements. I had involuntary movements of my toes that started, and I thought they were muscle spasms. I actually thought, maybe I have a muscle, maybe some muscles in my feet or, something's wrong that way. And I could just easily get this treated. But it spread to my fingers, my upper trunk, my face, my neck, and even my vocal cords.
This would be like Parkinson's, Tanita? Would you say
similar.
these movements?
Well, the movement, it was involuntary movements. So the movements were like wriggling movements and thrusting and twisting, and like my body would move from side to side, up and down, like, all over the place. It looked as though I was, if you didn't know any better, you would probably think I was intoxicated or under the influence of some kind of drug, or maybe maybe had a psychiatric illness. That's what it looks like to the outside, looking in.
I see.
Wow. Wow. Well, tell us about your diagnostic journey. How long did it take to get a diagnosis? And how and why did being Black complicate your journey?
Well, I was told when I was going to the doctors, to try to investigate this whole problem that involuntary body movements that started out. I thought, oh my God, I was going to see teams of doctors. I wasn't just seeing like one doctor at, here and one doctor there. There were teams of them. And what they would do.
Were they talking to each other, or were they all individual?
They were all together, and they would look at me and examine me, do the neurological exam. They would I even had some videotape me and of the movements, and, and they looked at me and they said, well, we can be sure of one thing. One thing for certain we know is that you don't have it because you're African American. They said Black people don't get Huntington's disease. That's the one thing we know. And I just really believe that. I believe that that falsehood. I believed it.
Well, why not? Why wouldn't you?
Yeah. I trusted. I think they obviously know. They're the experts. They went to medical school. They would know.
Yeah.
And I was told that was the one thing I definitely could write off the list. Could scratch. So, and I was told that, maybe you have a mental problem. Maybe this is all psychiatric. Maybe someone beating you at home. They looked at me and said, maybe you're drug seeking. I was accused of drug seeking because I would be shaking, and I would go to the emergency room. And when I would go to the emergency room, they would give me Ativan. So they would shoot me up with lots of Ativan. And what Ativan does is Ativan paralyzes the muscles temporarily, and it's a controlled substance. So they would give me a lot of it, and then I would stop shaking, and then they would discharge me, and then they would give me a note, that discharge note that says if you have any more symptoms, come back, or whatever.
Sure.
They would send me home, and then the drug would wear off, and then I would start shaking again, and I'd go back, and they'd say, aha, you're here for drugs. You're here because you're addicted to drugs, and you need to come, tell us that you're addicted to drugs, So
Tanita, I'm so sorry.
I was horrified. I was horrified.
How long did this go on? How long was this journey?
This journey was about 2 years. 2 years of going everywhere. I went all over. I was in New York City, of all places. New York City, big city, obviously, one of the biggest in our country. And yet I went to all these people that were movement disorder specialists, regular neurologists. I went to psychiatrists, just all types of people. And the psychiatrist, what was interesting was the psychiatrist actually said, no, you don't have a psychiatric illness. They said, whatever this is, it's neurological in nature. Mm-hmm. And the psychiatrist actually said, they need to go back to the drawing board on this because this is not psychiatric in nature. And I was clear of having a psychiatric illness at that time.
Tanita, were these involuntary movements, were these disruptive in your life? Could you eat? Could you take care of yourself?
It was so embarrassing. I was absolutely horrified because when it spread throughout my entire body, what would happen is my body would contort from side to side in the front, and I had problems with my mobility. So I had I had hundreds of falls. I had lots of falls. I'm surprised I didn't break anything. I'm surprised I didn't break anything, but I had a lot of falls. I had a lot of I would go on the train or take public transportation, and people would get up and move their seat and be scared, of me, because I would be shaking. And, they would hug their children tighter to them. I was so scared, and I was so embarrassed and ashamed because I didn't know what was going on with my body.
So sorry.
And so here's the interesting part. I lived alone.
Right.
And I didn't know what my body did in my sleep. They would ask me trick questions like this at the doctor. They'd say, "What do you do in your sleep?" And I'd say, "Well, how would I know?
How do you know?
I don't know what I do in my sleep. Who knows what they do in their sleep if they don't have a partner with them or somebody to verify whatever they're doing?" So, for me, it was like, I don't know. And so, it was a nightmare. I was accused of everything.
Sorry.
They even said, "What about AIDS, HIV?" Because a lot of African Americans have HIV. So they did AIDS tests on me. I was tested over and over for lupus because I was told that Black people get lupus a lot and I must have lupus. And I said, I've never seen a lupus person act this way or react in this kind of manner, and they said, it's probably lupus. So I got tested like maybe 6 times for lupus, and it was all negative. They just wouldn't stop. And it was over and over.
When did you finally do any genetic testing or anything? Who ordered it? How could this happen?
Well, here's the interesting part. I had a female doctor, and I think highly of her. I think she's a wonderful person. Unfortunately, she was a part of a team that supervised her. So in other words, she could only do so much within her scope of practice. So I was seeing her directly, and she was a wonderful woman at a place in New York. And she said, "You know what? I feel like it's Huntington's disease. I'm going to test you for Huntington's." And I said, "You know what? I said, what do we have to lose?" I said, "Are they testing me for everything else?"
Right.
So she ordered the blood work. I went to the lab and they drew the blood. Okay. Her supervisor got so angry with her and told her that was impossible, that I had Huntington's because I was Black. And he canceled the test. He made her cancel the test. So I suffered another 7 months after that. Because I had to find another doctor to test me. And she told me, she goes, if you find another doctor, I understand. She goes, "I'm so sorry, but this is out of my control." Politically, it's out of my control. She's like, "This doctor is control, he's calling the shots. He's the head of the department."
Did he ever learn the truth about your diagnosis once it came?
Yes, he did.
Did he apologize?
No, absolutely not. You know what I did? Did? I made a list. I had a list of everybody. And I called them all up after I got my diagnosis. And I said, "Guess what? You were all wrong. I have Huntington's disease." And they were, absolutely shocked, most of them. And the one lady doctor, she cried. She was very emotional. She was very upset. Yeah, she was very upset about it. But the other doctors were like, "Well, what do you expect? Black people don't get Huntington's." And I don't know if I believe that diagnosis. And I don't know if I actually had doctors being combative with me, saying, "I don't know if I even believe the DNA test."
Really?
That was crazy. I had doctors challenge the DNA test.
Well,
So
did anybody explain to you what Huntington's was at this point? Did this new doctor that finally ordered the test explain what to expect, what it was, what it could be in your life?
Well, she basically was like, okay, because they had also tested me for Sydenham's chorea. They tested me for, which is Wilson's disease. I was tested for that. So then she was explaining, she goes, "Huntington's disease is genetic." She was like, "But you don't have a family history." She was like, "However, what we're going to do is test you anyways. And I really believe that we might be onto something." And I said, "You know what? What could it hurt?" And I went home and Googled Huntington's disease. And when I read the what it really was, I was like, holy crap. I was like, I don't know. I said, but, if it is what this is, then at least I know, you know what I mean?
Right.
Because I was But I had been told at this point by so many doctors, you don't have to worry about this. This is the one thing you don't have to worry about, over and over and over again. So I felt like, okay, what could it hurt for another test, right? Another negative test is going to come up. This is what I was thinking in my head. And then when she told me, I'm sorry that the doctor made me cancel the test. And if you find another doctor, I understand. And if you get tested for Huntington's, make sure that that's what you get tested for.
Wow.
And it took me 7 months. It took me 7 months after that to find another doctor,
Tanita, this just goes to show, you really have to be your own advocate.
That's right.
Our medical system, I think, our doctors they try to help us, but they're not perfect. And we have to take it upon ourselves. And I'm sorry you had to do this on your own. You didn't have someone, a partner, to help you through this challenge. This is really a nightmare scenario that you're describing to get to your diagnosis. And so now you finally got your diagnosis. Can I ask, I almost don't want to hear, did you get at least a personal, or was it over the phone that you received this diagnosis? Was it in person or over the phone?
Well, here's the weird part. Okay, it was in person, and
Good.
I freaked out. Okay, what I did was I immediately screamed, and I said, "That's not this." I said, "That's not true, doctor. This can't be right." I said, "Something's going on. There's a mix-up at the lab. Somebody mixed up my blood with somebody else's." Like I was trying to I was really in shock. And he said, "You know what?" He says, "You know what we'll do? We'll retest you again and do another DNA test." But he goes, "This time we're going to do a different lab and go to a different lab." And he said, "And then we'll go from there." So he goes, "But I'm really confident that this test is positive." And sure enough, he was right. I got tested in a different lab, and it came back exactly the same. And I had to accept that it was true. Yes. Because 2 DNA tests, you know what I mean?
Yes, I think.
Wow.
But it sounds like you finally ended up with someone that was able to tell you in a compassionate way and really to allay your fears that he was going to repeat it. So you were confident, and you can't face something you don't believe in. So you had to be convinced that this was your diagnosis. I can certainly understand that.
Yeah.
So let's discuss what goes into making a positive diagnosis of Huntington's or HD. There's a complicated genetic structure. Do you want to explain that to our listeners?
Basically passed from parent to child. And it doesn't skip a generation. It doesn't work that way. If you don't inherit the gene, you cannot pass it on to your offspring. If you inherit the gene, you have a 50-50 chance every single time you have a child. It's not just like, if I have 4 kids, only one of them could possibly have it. No, if you have 4 kids and you're positive, you have a 50-50 coin toss every single time you have those children of having a positive or a negative DNA result. Anything over 36 CAG number is considered positive for Huntington's. That's pretty much how, but it can go, the number can go all the way in the hundreds.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
So Tanita, would you mind sharing with us, what number are you?
I'm 39. I'm a 39, which is actually what is called, it's actually called a reduced penetrance. And reduced penetrance is actually anybody that has a 36 to a 39. That's the cutoff. And that's considered reduced. And people with reduced penetrance typically don't show symptoms until they're older, like elderly, like between 65 and 75 years old. Like that's how old they get with showing symptoms with a repeat like mine. So I was showing one at 35 years old. So for me,
so that doesn't really make sense, does it?
It doesn't. That's right.
Because that's too early. So for instance, what you're saying is if someone, let's say, has a 60 repeat, they would show early signs
Like they would be
HD.
a child. Like it would
That
be a
would
child,
be,
teenager.
you would have very noticeable early signs. But a low number like you have shouldn't occur until you're older. But for some reason, you started getting early signs, and we don't know.
That's a perfect segue to my question, which is, do you believe that environmental factors played a role in your early onset Huntington's disease when your numbers were in the low penetrant area?
Yes. My doctor I was living in a New York apartment that I was exposed to about 22 months of carbon monoxide and gas poisoning. It was intermittent, and it was really bad. The city got involved. Yeah. Oh yeah. But I'm lucky to be alive. You know what I mean? I was breathing that stuff in, and the doctors believe that was a catalyst to what set off the early symptoms of this disease, because they said it didn't make sense scientifically and genetically. It didn't make sense with my marker number to be what it is, to be sick. Like it didn't make sense. And once you start having symptoms, you can't reverse it. You know what I mean? Once that train leaves the station, it runs its course. So that's why I take medication every 12 hours.
Wow.
Because I can't reverse what happened. I can't reverse, the onset.
Wow. Well, I'm sure Huntington's disease must have felt like such a devastating diagnosis. And I'm just wondering how you begin to process this new reality.
Well, I just kept, at first I spent years, and I mean years, in and out of hospitals. I've had hundreds of falls. I've had lots of, I was just constantly having problems medically. And it wasn't until I started to take control of my own health and really be my own best advocate. And that's when because I started doing physical therapy on a regular basis. I started doing occupational therapy, speech therapy, acupuncture. I was doing I was doing all kinds of therapy because because I was lucky and blessed to have good insurance that covered all of this stuff. So I started having that, and I realized, and then I started doing research. I moved back to my hometown. I live in Cleveland.
Yeah.
And so I go to the Cleveland Clinic, and they are phenomenal. And I deal with them, and they're like number 2 in the world, as far as the ranking, and they're amazing. And my doctors are absolutely unbelievable. And I mean, when I tell you I have a great team, I have an amazing team, and they help me with everything. So having that support from the medical support, and then also being a part of the HD community, I actually got connected with other HD people. And you know what? I started feeling like, I'm not alone. I'm not alone with this diagnosis, and it was important for me to, to connect and to really connect with other people, and to, it was important to get some help therapy.
Absolutely. I mean, as odd as this sounds, it sounds a little like something I've heard and I've felt before, where when I got a diagnosis, no matter how devastating or difficult it is or anything, there's something almost liberating about it, because it's a way of explaining the unexplainable. And there's some element of you feel, in control of yourself, in that there are some answers, whether you want them or not, you've gotten there. Is that, was there some of that?
I got answers after 2 years. Yes, I got answers after 2 years. And it was nice to put a name to something, so people could say, I mean, just the fact that and then after that, I could walk into a hospital and they could look at my medical chart and say, oh, she's got Huntington's. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And instead of going, oh, she's here for drugs or,
Right.
I wasn't looked at in a suspicious way.
You were treated in a compassionate way.
Exactly. And with
suitable to your diagnosis.
Respect. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, Tanita, it's so interesting because in researching Huntington's for the podcast today and for our interview, it seems that most of the time when there's a diagnosis of Huntington's, it's because a parent or a grandparent shows signs. And so it is not a far stretch when the child starts having symptoms. What is very strange in your situation is you're the first one. So this is an unusual twist on a pretty predictable story. Can you tell us a little bit about your diagnosis and what followed that?
Well, I didn't have, I didn't come from a family of gene positive people, at least, to have as a reference point. But looking back at the symptoms and looking back at, because it's more than just the choreatic movements. There are psychiatric symptoms, like depression, like people think that it's almost even like bipolar-like sometimes with the psychiatric component. Your mood is up and down. And also your cognition, the way you process information.
But clearly that's not happened to you.
Oh, no.
The cognition has definitely not happened to you. I'm listening to you. You're an author. I mean,
believe it or not, I have had cognitive problems. Believe it or not, I have cognitive deficits. Yes, I got tested with a neuropsychiatric testing, and I do have some deficits in my cognition. Believe it or not, I started out in a high bracket, in a high level. So, I don't have, you know what I mean? It's not. And plus I go to school, and plus I practice every day with reading and writing. And I'm constantly doing things to keep my mind sharp, my memory sharp.
You are such a motivated person, and you're motivating me. And I know you're going to be motivating our listeners. So this gets us to your book. And we really want to talk about your book, because in the book, you talk about 5 ways to have a positive disposition. This is something that we can all share. This is something that will benefit all of us. So can we take a moment and go through each of the 5 steps that you talk about in your book? And let me see. So number 1 is embrace change and adapt. What do you mean by that?
Well, embracing change, the fact is I had to say, look, okay, now I have Huntington's, and I have to adapt to the new normal. I have to, my new normal is the old me is no longer. I have to adapt to a new version of myself. And hopefully it's going to be a better version than before, or in a more improved version than before. So what I've done is
I love that.
I embrace that. I embrace that, that this is the new diagnosis, but I can still find a way to accept it, accept this diagnosis and move forward with how I go about my life, my day-to-day life.
Beautiful. Well, can you tell us then about learning from difficult moments?
For me, learning from difficult moments is, realizing that you can't judge a book by its cover. And unfortunately, that's what happens with a lot of people with Huntington's, not just me, in my book, in my, my story, but a lot of people with Huntington's are often misjudged. And I think that it's important to educate people as much as possible, like police, like law enforcement, people like that, because they, again, it can be a problem.
Yeah.
if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And, hospitals, medical professionals, things like that.
Wow. Well, what about my favorite, the power of community?
Oh, the power of community is amazing. It's like it's weird. It's in a weird way. It's like I feel like I've developed a new family. I've been an entirely new family. People in the neurological world, and people with, I feel a connection with other Huntington's people and other Huntington's families, people who with Parkinson's, people with, Alzheimer's, ALS, or whatever. I have a lot more compassion, and I don't know. I feel connected. We all feel connected. It's wonderful to be able to talk about things that are, that may bother you with your disease or condition, and other people can understand without it, having to really explain yourself. It's nice to talk to other people that get it. They understand what it's like to have fatigue. They understand what it's like to maybe go through depression. They understand what it's like to have, falls, or, dealing with their doctors, going through medication, trying different medicine and having trial and error with different medications. Dating, how do you date with a situation?
Wow.
Like, how do you date when you have a chronic illness? How do you have a social life of any kind?
Yeah.
What can you do about that? So it builds a sense of community where you can do things with other people that understand you. And it means the world to me.
Okay, so number 4 would be celebrating milestones. What do you mean by that?
Oh, celebrating milestones. It was like I celebrated the fact that I put my rollator away and my cane away. I still keep that stuff in my house, but I keep it close. But the fact that I don't have to use it anymore on a daily basis is amazing.
Wow.
I mean, I went from using a rollator, using a cane, using a shower chair, to just take a shower. Now I can take the shower chair out and put it aside, and I could take my shower, and I don't have to worry about
what's
sitting in a
responsible
This is the medication?
Is this the medication?
Wow.
It's a combination of, I have done a holistic change, like my diet, I exercise. Believe it or not, I also, now I've combined traditional and non-traditional methods. The traditional stuff is like the cocktail of drugs that I take every day. I take medicine every 12 hours. That's, you guys are pretty much, can figure that one out. But the other thing I do is I do medical cannabis. I actually I do the pills or the gummies or the tinctures. And believe it or not, it
helps.
Actually
really
helps. It's unbelievable. Yes. It helps with me like concentrating. I do. Yeah. I actually have a medical marijuana card. My doctors are all on board with everything. I clear everything before I do anything with my doctors.
Right.
And my doctors are amazing. I have a therapist. I have the regular doctors, a big team of doctors that we deal with my symptoms on a as needed basis. So if I'm feeling a little wobbly or whatever, or maybe my mobility is a little weird, I will start with physical therapy. If I need if I have problems with my cognition or memory, I will go to a speech therapist. But in the meantime, it's diet and exercise. Believe it or not, diet, exercise, lots of water. My sleep is huge. I have a sleep journal. I keep a journal for sleep, a journal for my health log. I take vitamin supplements. I am extremely on top of everything that I do. I keep a diary of everything. So,
wow.
So this sounds like we're getting into your last tip of the 5, and that's your self-care priority.
Yes.
So does that sounds like just keeping a journal might be?
Yes, keeping a log of everything.
Yes. Keeping
a sleep and really, really paying attention to your sleep hygiene, because your sleep affects so much. Believe it or not. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's like if I don't have a good night's rest, at least 6 to 8 hours of a good night's rest, I am no good the next day, or I'm a little foggy or a little off. I'm not myself. My mood is a little off. I might feel a little, just disoriented. That's why it's so important for me to sleep as much as I and really keep track of my sleep.
Wow.
Very
this is
good
fabulous.
Tips.
Yeah.
Very good tips.
Well, Tanita, I've got to ask, is there any parting advice that you'd like to leave for our audience today? Because you've been so inspirational and helpful with these tips for a hopeful disposition. Is there any other advice you'd like to leave for our audience?
Well, I'd like to say that, you can, just because you have a diagnosis does not mean it's a death sentence. And you are not your disease, you're not your condition. And it does not define who you are as a person. And you can still live your best life no matter what. And, just if I can do it, anybody can do it. And that's what I would say.
Wonderful. Well, Tanita, thank you for being a guest on It Happened to Me. Your story is a persistent and an inspirational one, and we wish you good health and a continued hopeful disposition. Thank you.
Likewise.
And please, for our audience, please check out Tanita's book, We Exist. And you can order a copy directly from her website at TanitaAllen.com. And this link will also be listed in the show notes for It Happened to Me, this show with Tanita. So thank you, and be well.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of It Happened to Me. We encourage you to learn more at ithappenedtomepod.com. Please use the contact form on our website to submit your guest suggestions, comments, questions, ideas, and feedback for the show. You can also email us directly at ithappenedtomepod@gmail.com. We would really appreciate it if you can leave us a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app like Apple or Spotify. This helps others in the rare disease and medical challenge community find us. It Happened to Me is created and hosted by Cathy Gillenhorn and Beth Glassman. I'm Keir Deneen from DNA Today, and I serve as our executive producer and marketing lead. Amanda Andrioli is our associate producer. Ashlyn Anokian is our graphic designer. And remember, it happened to me. I'm not alone, and neither are you.